This week on Influence, you and everyone you love is going to die. So let's talk about that. Hello, friends and listeners. You've done it again. You've clicked on the Influence podcast with me, Matt Silverman. It's a program about internet creativity, internet culture, internet communities, the people, and sometimes the animals. We like pets on the internet, who make the stuff we love to scroll, read, listen to, attach ourselves to, be part of, even when we can't be with the people we love to talk to in real life. We do it on the internet, and that is a pretty magical thing. It can also be a pretty hairy thing, pretty complicated thing, as we've covered many times on this program and this feed. We're here for another week, and this week we're going to cover a topic that I like to call death. I'm not really looking forward to this one. Okay. I promise you it'll be great. It's going to be a good episode, but you're going to have to stick with me as we talk about some difficult topics here. I want to jump right in because I have not one, but two guests for you this week. More bang for your buck here on the Influence podcast. I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to get right down to it so they can explain in their own words. I don't want to put words in their mouth about what they do on the internet. Caren Martineau is the founder of Bevival.com, which is an online resource and community devoted to improving death literacy. We will talk about what that means in just a moment. And Jade Adgate is a practicing death midwife, and also maybe another term for that, a death doula. I'm going to ask her what those terms mean, how they relate to each other momentarily. She works with individuals and families facing end-of-life challenges and is the founder of the Farewell Fellowship. And it is my privilege to welcome them both to the Influence podcast today. Hello.
Hi.
How are you both?
Hi, Matt.
We have a live studio audience here. They were a little delayed. I queued them up to clap, and then
they clapped for you and not for me.
A little slow on the uptake.
Yes, very enthusiastic.
How are you both? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I love having a chance to talk about death and grief, especially when it's not something that people are excited to talk about. I think there's even more fertile soil for us to plant some seeds in.
Yes. I'm fans of both of your work. I have so much respect and admiration for it. But as I said, I don't want to do this right now. I don't need this in my life. So to kick it off, why don't you each explain what you do? And then perhaps, when you meet someone like me who's like, I don't want to deal with this, how do we talk about it? How do we get into this topic?
Yeah, well, we start one by acknowledging your discomfort, right? And to tell you time's up about that. We are in this movement of change, and it is really appropriate. The old paradigm regarding not talking about it, it's kind of like, certainly people, and certainly prior generations, when people got cancer, it was like, cancer, right? And so now we've moved on, and the D word, especially in these times of awareness, right? We've explored so many things as a culture, as a species. We've busted paradigms over and over again. And the final frontier, literally, is end of life. So we each come to this with a calling from our different perspectives. And I come out of culture change, and my career has been through the creative lens. So I'm bringing this to the conversation because when I started looking at it or realizing that it was just around the corner, not that I'm ill or not that I had an inciting incident whatsoever, but impermanence is a real conversation that we need to be having as a culture and a global population, especially in light of the fact that we have stepped away from the traditional spiritual relationships that have helped us cross the chasm, right?
Yep.
It's taken away the kind of fear, dread that has kept us, first of all, the idea of heaven or hell is, it keeps you in line. It helps you be a better citizen, right? It's because
or that it extends the continuum of permanence. We can't quite get our heads around the idea that we are temporary, so we have to believe that there is something more. And as we become more secular, I'm a secular person. I don't know. It feels more. I don't know. I go back and forth. It feels more scary to know that like nothing matters, and then it also is very liberating to think like, no, we're just specks here. And briefly before you go on, Caren, I think the internet is a big part of this. Like you were saying, awareness of social issues and cultural. We're having many cultural moments about social justice and race and Me Too and everything. The internet is integral to this, and it sounds like you're looking to online communication as a way to get better about the D word.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're poking at this, and the internet has been instrumental. So has the pandemic.
Right, exactly.
Right. So we saw what happens when one is not prepared. No one is prepared for death, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to experience the tragic death, but there's a natural arc to life, and we expect to be born, have a healthy life, and die old, right?
Yeah.
So where we are now, and I'm going to let Jade jump in at any point, where we are now is that we're simply living longer and dying slower. And we are visualizing death in a way that prior generations never had the opportunity to do.
That's fascinating.
And so with that, we need to, it's really important that we develop this relationship with ending of life, right? In a different manner, because the go forward is really tragic for next generation.
Yeah.
We leave a lot of grief in our wake because we're unprepared. And Jade's work has a tremendous amount to do with that and the preparation and the healing of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, my work is what is left when we live in a society where we are so disconnected, right, from each other. We don't have the kind of community support that we used to have, particularly through the harder transitions. And so the work of death doulas and midwives is to come alongside families and to walk through them, through this landscape. Sometimes we can offer tools. Sometimes we can help prepare. Sometimes we can normalize the parts of the process. Sometimes we literally are just there to witness, right? But essentially, it's, I think, what you guys are talking about, that the world is changing. And we have to figure out how we can bring more integrity to the end of life process as a natural and necessary and unavoidable part of this humanity. And I think the internet, it's so exciting because it does offer us ways to connect, right? Like we can be connecting virtually. We can find resources, even if they're not, in our families, in our homes, in our communities like they used to be.
Yep. So, Caren, why don't you explain in a nutshell, what is Bevival, what is its purpose, and then Jade, I would love to hear more about midwifery and doula and the distinction between those terms and your work with, your IRL work, or maybe your virtual work too, both.
So, Bevival is a concept that really began when I was approaching this period of time where I went, really, I have less time than I have more.
Which is so existentially mind-blowing.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So So with that in mind, and given my, the foundation of my creative work, it's a conversation that really, you need to tell the truth about it. You need to take, as best as possible, the ugly out of it. It's a conversation that needs to be gift wrapped in order to serve it up for consumption.
Yeah.
Right. So I am both a creator, but I'm also a consumer. And as a consumer, what is it that is going to bring me to the table, that is going to dispel my preconceived notion of my biases of what this is? And just let me in on it. So Bevival really started as an online platform, a gathering place to have a conversation that was really comfortable to step into, offered a lot of content from different points of view, so that if one thing wasn't quite appealing to you as a viewer, then you can keep meandering through it. And you could find something that just felt correct.
Yep.
And once you find that dialogue, that conversation, that engagement, then it's like, okay, not so bad.
Right.
And you're going to want to continue. And
Yep.
really, so what this is that it's designed to be an initiation, an introductory course, like a 101. I heard about, or somebody near me died and scared the heck out of me.
Yep.
Or I feel really bad and I don't know where to go. And now there's such a proliferation of resources online and off, but online, it's particularly magnificent in its breadth. So how do you meander? Are you ready to speak with other people, or you just want to be a listener and a viewer? So that's really what Bevival's about. It's about bringing forward a gentleness with a lot of different gateways to get into that conversation. Right. Yep. So there's an online presence, and then there's also an offline presence. And in real life, I do events. I do events similar to that to initiate the dialogue, to bring the experts into the room, but to just kind of exhale, because people walk in the room and their shoulders are up by their ears and they're tense, but they did elect to be in the room, right? So something motivated them to, let me find out what this is about. Right. And both of these modalities or form factors are really essential, depending on the person's personality and their age and all of that. How do they feel most comfortable investigating what impermanence and mortality means to them?
Yep. It's making me think of when experts or counselors talk about everyone grieves in their own way. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. Everyone needs their own entry point. So you're creating this place, this community and content for different modalities, as you said. And then even doing the conferences, it made me think of when you go to a wake or a funeral or whatever, you dread it, and you're like, you go in like this, and then you see your family and your friends, and you're sharing stories and you're looking at pictures, and you end up having a very nice time talking about and reconnecting with people. And I don't know, your event sounded a little bit like that in its mode.
Yeah, I mean, yes, like that. But the fact that you brought that up. So one of the things that motivated me to go here, when I have no historical impetus to have done that, right? Yeah. I'm not coming out of the medical universe. I'm not coming out of the end of life universe. There was not a bad death that happened that pushed me down this lane. So really what happened is my friends, their parents started dying of this and that. And I went to a series of funerals over the course of like a year. Yeah. And it was this, regardless of spiritual affiliation, you walk into the funeral home. Some of them were plain vanilla. Some of them were ornate churches or, houses of worship. And it's the same thing. People are dressed in dark. And it's like this code of behavior that I understood and I was a part of, but it didn't make sense. Yeah. So, they walk in, everybody, and you sit in the pews, and everyone's shoulders are slumped and their heads are, and then I'm looking at my friends and their family, they get up. Some of them adored their parents.
Yeah.
Some of them really had miserable relationships. And so getting the words out to acknowledge that relationship and it's not true, but they're doing their best to be kind.
Yeah.
And then people walk out of this behavior and they go into the ante room, or they go, to the person's home to sit shiva or whatever. And then that celebration of life arises.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of this. So if we could take away this archival type of behavior,
right?
The forcedness, yes, of course, that there is sadness.
Mm-hmm.
There is sadness upon loss of life. But if we could really move it to a place where people are informed and they truly are elevating their relationship, the relationship that they had, to a proper place, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Jade, tell us about midwifery and also your online work. On social media.
So I am usually called in the moment. When we haven't had that gentle invitation abstractly and to consider death, and we are overwhelmed and staring it in the eye, that's when you call your local death midwife or death doula. So death doula, the word doula is rooted in ancient Greek, and it really just means servant. So that's the spirit of all doula work, whether it's at the beginning of life or through other transitions like menopause or at the end of life. And midwifery is an elevation of that skill set. So a doula may be there to witness and offer really practical hands-on tools. The term midwife usually implies a more complex education, so that they will also offer things like home funerals, or like washing and preparing and anointing a body for burial, or helping to facilitate that process. But really, they're interchangeable. This is still, it's an ancient tradition, but kind of a new profession. And so there's not any regulation in this space. So you can call yourself whatever you want.
That's very interesting.
It is interesting. I was talking to a room of people recently, and I started off with death doula, and that made sense to the younger people because they were in their childbirthing years, right? So they got that. Right. And then when someone said, well, that sounds kind of like a guide. And I was just thinking, like, I've never died, so it doesn't feel right to call myself like a death guide, right? Like there's some kind of implicit like experience that I don't feel I can, authentically claim. But I think that it's the same heart of the work, right? It's being able to walk alongside people, to normalize the process, to educate, to advocate, to empower through conversation and connection. And to offer whatever tools are supplemental and helpful, usually outside of the mainstream medical system. So usually more holistic and therapeutic tools that aren't widely respected in the medical institutions are going to be the things that the doulas and the midwives are drawing on.
Right. So then, yeah, that's really, it's very profound that you're like, name any other profession. And it's like, I've done this 800,000 times and I'm an expert in this. And that's like, well, no one has died to then become a professional dyer. We're going to get into this in a moment, the distinction between helping the grievers and helping the dyers. But please go on. I have something to share with you momentarily.
Well, I'd like to hear what you have to share. Let's go there first.
Well, what we set up our listeners for, obviously you're doing this in person with people in hospice care, and like you said, people are calling you. You're almost like a 911 or an ambulance for that service, which I didn't really think about until you just said it. But then you are sharing a lot of your wisdom and findings and practices online, Instagram, but maybe elsewhere. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
So the same heart as what Caren is bringing, right? Can we start inviting people into conversations in ways that feel comfortable, so that maybe there's less trauma that is inherent in the end of life process? And can we resource people to be utilizing the tools of death midwifery in their own lives and in their own families? And can we maybe bring a little awareness to what our anxiety around death is inviting us to, right? Like we would not have fear if we did not feel something very deeply, right? So that is such a beautiful spark. And is there a way that we can share stories and share experience and knowledge and wisdom and philosophy and art that will be that bridge, right, to move in with curiosity to some of these spaces that are usually so marginalized?
It's making me think a little bit about other things that we don't like doing, like for example, exercise. Of like, exercise kind of stinks and it hurts when you start it, but the more you do it, the better, the healthier you are, obviously. So I guess what I mean by that is like, I don't. I follow you, Jade, but I don't want to follow you. I don't want to be. I don't want to be scrolling through pictures of my friends' kids and then be reminded that that everyone I love will die. Right. But if the more I am reminded of it, the stronger and more literate I will be when it's time to face that. And how do you convince people?
Well, it's an understanding. It is an understanding. So it's like acclimatizing to something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
So you're going to change your clothes. You're going to change your wardrobe per season, right? And if you're introduced to the idea, it's normalcy early on. Now, children and young adults, unless there's some kind of traumatic event that occurred, they're fearless, right?
Yeah.
The concept of it, it has no meaning other than it is. It just is.
Yeah.
Okay. And everything that we feed through the entertainment lens,
yes,
there's a lot of death going on, death and dying, and
yeah,
right, and some of it is goal oriented, right? So there's the violence of all of this.
Okay.
Then then if you switch it over to the real life part of it, the heart centered, you take the chasm between real life and entertainment, right? And you bring it into, these are the stories and these are the things that one feels around this actual event. And you introduce it early on, and you do it through literature, right? Mostly literature. Certainly you could do it through entertainment, but the intimacy of creating that reality is, I think, extremely important. And really why I started collaborating with Jade, because it is taking the words, right, and taking the meaning and the storytelling, which is just so completely important to who we are. Right?
As a species, it's humanity is based on storytelling. Like, it is the campfire. It's everything, right?
And you bring that relationship in, right? And so what happens is people have the opportunity to close the distance between the obscure and the actual emotion feeling of it. That's like a primary step, I believe, that needs to happen. It's heart-centered, and it's opening up, getting rid of that cold arm's length relationship with something which is intangible, but an absolute reality.
Universal. Yeah. I have, when I prepare for a show, I have all my questions and I have a big outline for the show. And then sometimes our listeners ask their questions better than I do. So I am thrilled to have a voicemail to play for you here from one of our listeners. And this one has some depth and some context, so I'm gonna let it play, and then I think it's mostly for Jade, but I would love to hear both of your thoughts on it. Here it is.
Hey, Matt, this is Carrie, and I just wanted to say thank you for doing this and for having Jade on your show. This is pretty cool content. And to be honest with you, I thought you had hit peak things that Carrie is interested in when you had Katie Soros on the other day talking about ADHD.
Oh, that's a previous
that is right
episode.
up my alley as well. But this is honestly just as cool and just as curious. And so thank you. Jade, like, you posted something on your Instagram the other day saying that you didn't become a death doula because you wanted to help people. And honestly, that kind of made me chuckle, because why else would you be doing this kind of work, right? But then you went on to say that you became a death doula because you wanted to build a relationship with death, which honestly just like hit really hard, because so many people just avoid it and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. And, you know, you also said you wanted to build a community that knew how to support people in the way that you needed support. And honestly, that's how I found your work, was because I lost a family member and my mom was grieving, and I was trying to figure out how to support her in that grief. I also think it's really interesting that you say that death work is life work, because that's the thing that I kind of wonder about being a death doula. Like, are you doing this for the person who is passing over, or are you doing this for the people who are left behind? Because so much of this work is, I'm assuming, dealing with grief, right? I guess what I'm asking is, like, what is the role of the person, like, of you, who's like shepherding people through this transition? What exactly are you doing for the person who is dying and for their family who is left behind?
Carrie asked the question that I was about to get to, and I wanted to let her ask it. It's, you know, there's two sides of the work, and so maybe you can
I have so many things I want to say
approach
right now. That was such a beautifully complex statement, and there's like so many layers to that I think are really interesting. And the first kind of goes back to what you were saying that Caren spoke to. And I think that wanting to not see death literate content in your Instagram feed, it's also a privilege, right?
Yeah.
And I think as soon as you're the one that's sitting in the hard plastic hospital chair in the face of a terminal diagnosis, that privilege just evaporates. And that's when people usually look for my work. And so how do we support both the person who's dying and the person who's grieving? I mean, this is the work of midwifery, but this is also how we walk alongside people in community, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can start looking at death head on, that we can help people clarify their values and their fears and their hopes and their expectations. Death is so nuanced. It's this great mystery, and it's so normal to be fearful. No matter how many deaths I have witnessed, I still feel a spark of fear because I am staring into a void, right? Like, it would be probably unhealthy for me to not have fear. So how do we look at that fear and support it in the person that is facing it, and then the way that it trickles those who support them the best? So just from a death midwifery perspective, my work is always with the person who's dying. It's focused on them. As we get closer and closer to the moment of death, my work really shifts and becomes about supporting their caregivers, because what's going to feel the best for the person who's dying is those that they love and cherish the most, and the care that they can provide. So if I can support the caregivers and they can show up more presently and fully, then that's actually going to feel the best for the person who's dying.
Yeah, because they don't know you, even though you're a warm, kind person. I just know that. I don't know you, but they don't know you. So if you're facilitating the loved ones, then they're the ones who can.
They know how you like to have your
transition.
Hair brushed or your feet rubbed, or the way you take your tea, or how you like to be tucked in, right? They know what words you're going to want to hear when you're feeling anxious. They know what's going to calm and soothe you. And they know the memories that have comprised a really meaningful life that makes it easier to reflect on at the end. But there are ways that we do build relationships, and death midwifery is hard to explain because it can look so many different ways. And sometimes I am hired and I build a relationship that can last years with someone. So if you have a diagnosis that's stage 4 and you're pursuing treatment, we can have a long time to build a relationship, right?
Yeah.
But I think grief is a part of that process too. So just as much as the people who are being left behind are trying to find a firm footing in grief, so is the person who is doing the leaving, right? I think grief is a huge emotional burden at end of life. It comes up in 1,000 different ways. And I suspect, David Kessler, who's kind of one of the grief experts, he literally copyrighted grief.com. So he's definitely an expert. His whole idea is that the way that we begin to integrate grief into our life is to make meaning. And I think that that's true for people at end of life too. So how do we move towards that which we fear by making meaning of what we have experienced and letting that comfort us, right? That's how we kind of integrate the grief into having a more full experience sometimes. There were so many layers to Carrie's question, though. I feel like I might have missed a couple.
I know. No, I mean, we're covering all the ground that we set out to cover. So thank you.
And the other thing is, and Jade, you can speak to this too, but the other part of this is when you are at arm's length from an ending of life, right? And you do not have that completion, and within that period of time, that void, that delta, there's so much unknown, incompletion. That tends to lead to, and I don't have the data, but there's a lot of complicated grief existing, and this is a real psychological term, right? In which is fueled by the fact that you did not bring some kind of closure to that relationship.
And I think we're kind of talking about the same things with different vocabulary. So back to the idea of not wanting to see it in the feed, right? It takes emotional courage to ask yourself to do it anyway.
Absolutely.
And it takes emotional courage to reflect on your life and on your death. It takes emotional courage to try to move into your experience with grief in a way that honors it as natural and necessary. All of this is emotional courage. And I think it's its own reward, right? Like the reward of having that cultivated practice.
But it's on me to make that first step because culturally and educationally, we don't require this. And so everything you're saying now is like, it makes me think, oh, what if we taught this in schools to kids?
Precisely. Exactly. It should be taught in school. Yeah. Just like sex ed.
That's perfect. That's a perfect analogy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Next generation.
Right. We'll get there.
We can't teach it we don't know.
Exactly. Like we're not. Our generation is not equipped, and so okay, all right. I'm seeing the bigger picture formulating here. Speaking of schools and education, both of your focus is very much on books and literature. Caren, you mentioned stories, which is media and entertainment and storytelling, but a lot of the authors that you talk to and profile and interview, et cetera, they're writing nonfiction. I think.
Yes.
Well, maybe not. About grief and death. So why the focus on books? Obviously, these are experts, but there might be more to it, I think.
Well, because it's self-elective, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's as simple as that. It's if you are in the conversation, if you're willing to dip your toe in the conversation, then here's a menu of offerings that from voices that are deeply respected and educated and practiced and can help you enter, and their point of focus or interest may align with yours. And if not, go here. For the most part, people are inclined to want to deal with something after the fact.
Yes.
Right? They're looking for the remedy after.
Right.
Even though I would hope, and we get to a place in our society where it becomes long before the end. It becomes an educational introduction way down when, it's like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You're really early in your life cycle when this becomes a what so.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Jade, I like to deal with nonfiction.
Yeah.
Given the audience, or the audience that I'm cultivating right now. Jade reads a lot of she reads a lot of fiction and she is able to interpret the messaging, the storytelling in movies, in mainstream movies, the story arc, like in books, there's always something happens, somebody dies. And then it is, how does the community around them react to that? Right? And you form opinions. So whether you're into fiction reading or nonfiction reading, we're covering all bases.
Yeah.
I think that books are a side door into conversations. I think especially with fiction, we allow ourselves to imagine the things that we are afraid of. And I think we're really comfortable with being introduced to scary ideas in a way that allows our subconscious to start processing them. I was with a family this week, and the person who's dying is in his 40s, and he was only diagnosed 8 weeks ago. So just a young and a really fast decline. And one of his children said to me, I feel like I am primed to be a Disney hero or villain. He said, I have everything I need: style, grace, looks, and now a dead parent.
Right, because that's every Disney movie.
Yes, and it prompted this. Yeah. We started going through all of the Disney movies, right? And as a kid, Bambi and Snow White and Cinderella, there's always grief at the beginning of the story that has to be, addressed, reconciled, integrated throughout the unfolding of the story. And
I've thought about having young kids myself and watching a lot of this media. I have thought about that often, and I think I would love to get your take on it too. Like, I don't think kids register that it's death and grief. I think the formula of these movies is like kids like the idea, they relate to the idea of being on their own, of like nobody. So for a normal kid who is not experiencing grief, nobody understands me. I like my things and my friends and whatever. And so a Disney movie is like, what if you had no one and you went out on an adventure? And kids are like, yeah, they don't even see the dead parents. They're just like, yeah, I got a sword and I'm on a ship and it's cool. But then you watch it as a parent and you're like, oh my God, this is devastating.
Right.
And it's got to be conscious at this point from Disney or a storyteller's point of view of like, what do we got? We got the missing parents; they're dead already. There's a formula here. So I don't know. What do you think about this?
I think that you are right, and that there is something about it that everyone can relate to, right? Every child can relate to that independence. And I think also subconsciously, when we're looking at grief developmentally and the way that children process death, it's not until they're even 4 that they start to have a concept of the finality of death. And then we're talking 8 or 9 before just the elegance of death, of the feeling of being haunted, of the void that a loved one leaves. All of this really doesn't take shape until we're, at the end of the adolescent phase. So I suspect that, you've probably had a kid in bed at the end of the night that said one of those philosophical questions, Daddy, I don't ever want you to die. I'm sure you've gotten one of those. I know I've gotten them quite a few times. It's their worst fear. Right? Like, it's a way to take the monster that's hiding under the bed or that's in the closet and to address it, right? To see that you can, even if the very worst thing you can imagine happens, you can still be the princess, right? You can still have the happy ending. There's still a hero in here, and you're still going to be able to grow around this. I think there's your independence may be rooted, right, and the capacity of what you endure. And I think that's something that we can all relate to. But I am a Disney adult, so I just have to add to what you just said that I do think that this generation, you've seen a reenactment of the classic Disney movies, a lot of live action. So we have a live action Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast. They did a Peter Pan. This is a whole thing. And if you watch closely, what you'll notice is that in these reenactments, they're giving a backstory to the villain. And they're giving something relatable to the villain that wasn't happening 50 years ago, right?
Right, bad guys are bad, and they're ugly and evil, and they
Right.
get defeated. But now we're humanizing, we're complexifying the villains a little bit. I haven't noticed that, but that's really
Maleficent
fascinating.
used to be a dragon that gets slayed at the end of Sleeping Beauty, and now there's a whole movie about how Maleficent was a good fairy, and then she got cast out because she couldn't meet these expectations of what it takes to be good in her kingdom, right?
That's Wicked also, the Wizard of Oz backstory.
There's
and all
something
that,
about grief that
Oh,
I
my
think is
goodness.
wrapped into this, right? Because we do grow into our power through grief. And I think when you're talking to someone who is bereaved, or especially when someone's dying, and the closest people to them who maybe didn't see it coming are walking through that process, they're almost always saying things like, I can't believe I'm not falling apart, or I thought I would be handling this so much worse, or I can't believe I'm even here right now. Like, how am I doing this? Like, we don't trust that we can get through it. And we create this imaginary, like, fictitious story where we're so much weaker and less powerful than what we actually are. I'm not saying it feels good or there's any joy that comes out of walking through this,
Of course.
right?
But Jade, that was culturally instigated, right? So if we look at the history of how America developed its relationship with death and dying and grief, and the transition out of the home, from the front parlor, which eventually was renamed as the living room, right? But it was the place where the body was laid out, and people had that intimate relationship, and children running in and out of the room, and there was a tangibility to it. And then when it was actually transported and became industrialized, and the white curtain was pulled, and it was filled with germs, and don't go there, or it's best you don't see this.
I would go back even into the evolutionary history of humans, of like, here's the village. We all probably live to 45 if we're lucky. And there's dead bodies and dead children all over the place. And it just is what it is. And then we compartmentalize and sectioned off all of the things and put religion around it and all that stuff.
Well, not just religion, but we put capitalism.
Thank you. That's much better said.
I mean, it's
you're
both,
correct.
but right. I think capitalism.
Well, they are intertwined, of course, but yes, fascinating.
And so you had the intermediaries, which blossomed as the funeral industry,
right?
And these intermediaries took on. If you look at the construction of the funeral parlors, mimicked from a design wise, they mimicked what was in the home.
Yeah.
Right. So now we've recreated this in a third party destination.
Right.
And they took on the language of comforting. We'll take care of that.
Right.
And the morose, sullen behavior, in the slump shoulders. So where we are now, after decades and a century of just, this is the way you behave.
Yes.
Really had its seeds way back 200 years ago, or 200 years ago. So now
it's not even taught. It's no one tells you to slump your shoulders when you go into a funeral. You just know it, and you feel like you have to do it. It's so fascinating.
Unnatural,
right?
And I mean, the way I think that we are, since we have been burying dead humans, there has been a ritual and sacredness and a holiness, and these bodies are buried by the people who cared for them. And so when you start outsourcing that, I think it feels unnatural to us. And it does feel a little scary, right? And I think that's why we're like literally protecting our most vulnerable parts. There is a very natural relaxation that I think happens when people facilitate some of the funeral in the home. And there's a major resurgence of this right now. I live in Nashville, and we have a big homesteading population. So I think a part of it is wanting to get away from corporations, wanting to get out of systems, wanting to do things themselves. And I think a part of it's what you're talking about. Like, this is hard enough. Do I have to go into a funeral home right now? Do I have to hire a funeral director and go sit across the table from somebody? And the truth is, you don't. There's no laws that require us to not care for our dead ourselves in any of the states. Louisiana's a little weird.
But I wouldn't know what to do. Like, the capitalistic clinicalness of outsourcing it does feel gross, but on the other side, I don't know what to do with the body of do I touch it? Do I carry it? What do I don't know. there's a whole education there that I'm completely oblivious
that's-
to. And my instinct would be, I need to call someone to handle this because I don't know how to do
but
it.
that's exactly what Caren was saying, right? Like that's been fed to us, that we don't know,
Right,
and we're
exactly.
not capable of trusting our own intuition. And I think this is exactly why we're in the situation we're in, where dying has become something that we think has to happen in medical institutions. But then it's catapulting our fear of death because nobody wants to die in a hospital, right? We watch that and we're like, oh God, that looks terrible. Not me,
Yes.
right? But we have
Right.
allowed the medical institutions to kind of wrap this up as their business, and they don't want it. They're not trained or taught how to do this. They're trained how to heal and save.
Yeah,
so they're like, no,
exactly.
not us, right? And the truth is,
Yeah.
the same parts of you that are called to action intuitively when you are caring from someone at the end of their life is the part that will know how to care for the body once the life has ended. And you will see, I hope that you don't, but you probably will, you will see that everyone has an inner knowing, and they just really need someone to tell them it's okay to trust that. And that's the role of the doula.
Yeah.
Right.
But even the children, my father-in-law died recently, and we kept his body at home for, 15 hours or so. And the children, the granddaughters in particular, they cared for him so gently and reverently as he was leaving his body, as he was shedding the body. They washed him, they lotioned him, they hugged him, they made him little bead bracelets. They cared for him perfectly. And then once he was dead, they continued that care. No one told them to do that. But I think as they were doing it, their little brains were processing. His skin is cooling,
Totally.
right? His eyes have
Wow.
gotten glassy. There's changes. There's, he's not in this body anymore.
Right.
And then it became a lot easier after the 15 hours for everyone to kind of get together and say, it might be time to call the funeral director, right? It wasn't this like urgent capitalistic system that's kind of driving us to hurry up and call the professional, right?
Yes, that's powerful. Just because, we are very fortunate. We have not had much grief in our family yet. We're, knock on wood, whatever you want to say about that. And so when it's like I don't think I've seen someone die. You know what I mean? Like in person, in the room. Can't think
and that's
of
a part of why I think the industry has developed the way it has, is that we're allowing media to give us a window into death because we don't have it in our homes and in our families the way we used to.
Exactly.
But what media is showing us is horror or true crime. It's showing us murder and violence and trauma and sensationalized things, right? And I think that does such a collective detriment because then, of course, we're afraid. So we're even like, there's some natural fear, and then there's our collective trauma response to the way that the media has fed us this myth of what death is like. And as someone who has been around a lot of people as they have taken their last breath, it really is not scary at all. It's so holy.
Yeah.
It feels so still.
Yeah. All right. That's
You know, so during the what came to rise during the pandemic, right? So the term, although it had been floated prior to that, it really came into the public awareness, was the bad death.
Yeah.
Right? So the good death is a Disney death.
Right.
You close your eyes, you fold your hands, everybody's around you, the tears. Okay, fine. Passed away peacefully.
Right.
The bad death is the violent death, the unattended death, right? The loneliness, the aloneness, where nobody could be around them, their loved ones.
Right.
And then what do you do with the body, right? So now, after all of this collective, visceral information that we've received, things are moving in the right direction, right? And we are developing. We're just part of a very large movement of individuals, professionals, and just volunteers that are showing up that really want to transform this relationship so that we're not scared of it, you know? We're not scared of birth with all its messy, ugly, sticky, yucky stuff. The same exact thing happens at end of life. It's sticky, yucky, unpleasant at times, but somehow that is really, you don't want to look at it. It's it's a head-on collision where you definitely want to look at almost the same exact thing as life is happening.
And we know how to do it, to Jade's point. Like, it's natural. Like, a woman who is pregnant for the first time doesn't know how she's going to give birth, but then she does it, and it's like, oh my God, I did that. Like, that's unbelievable. How did I do it? And I guess, I mean, like, no one can prepare for that truly until they've done it.
Yeah, it's exactly the same, right? At end of life. Exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, we're putting the bookends here on the shelf. We have to take a break. We'll talk more about these topics in a moment. But first, before we go, it's trivia time.
Oh, boy.
The listeners demand that I ask a trivia question of every guest. This week, we got to set the stakes. So what did I do here? Okay. It's a multiple choice question. So you have a shot. If you get it right, and this goes for each of you, whoever gets it right, I will pay for all of your funeral expenses when you die, if you get the question correct.
Really? I didn't get the paperwork on that.
By being a guest on this show, you have already agreed to the terms of service. If you do not get it correct, you must amend your wills and leave all your worldly possessions to me. Are you prepared?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Confidence and hesitation.
Sure.
All right. This week we're talking about death and grief communities on the internet, and this week's trivia is about a guy that I like to call Frank Sinatra. Have you heard of him? Okay. For the Gen Z listeners who may not be familiar, Frank Sinatra was a very famous asshole who also was a great singer. All right. On May 14th, 1998, Old Blue Eyes died in Los Angeles at 82 years old from a heart attack. When the 911 call was received at 9:14, the ambulance made it to his house in 4 minutes and then arrived at Cedars Sinai Medical Center at 9:35. This is unprecedented because, as we know, Los Angeles traffic, during the day or during the evening would have been murder for this ambulance. So for some reason, the ambulance made record time getting Frank Sinatra to the hospital. He did pass away from cardiac arrest at the hospital. Why were the streets of Los Angeles so empty on the night that Frank Sinatra died? I have 3 choices for you. Was it A, the U.S. Geological Survey predicted that an earthquake could hit L.A. on the night of May 14th, so many cautious residents stayed off the roads? The quake did come, but 1 month later, when the city was not suspecting it, causing thousands of injuries. That is choice A. Or was it B, a North American gasoline shortage caused by a ruptured oil pipeline in Canada, sent gas prices through the roof in May of 1998. Many drivers, especially in California, stayed off the road, like in general, to conserve gas for emergencies. Or was it C, everyone was at home watching the series finale of Seinfeld? Why did Frank Sinatra's ambulance make record time in LA traffic on May 14th, 1998?
Everything in me wants to say C, but I'm going to go with B, actually.
All right.
Yes.
Jade goes with B, the gas prices, the oil shortage. Caren, do you have an approach here, a strategy?
I would choose B or C. What time are we talking about again?
This is 9:14 p.m.
West Coast.
West Coast, that's correct.
I'm going to say Seinfeld.
All right, Caren goes with Seinfeld. We will find out the correct answer after this important break. Hey there, friends. It's Matt from the future here, and I am thrilled to report that I am still alive. So So I've got that going for me. I would also like to report that the Influence podcast is made possible by listeners and viewers like you. It's a lot of work to make this show. I'm not cutting any corners. We're finding the best guests. We're trying to get the best production values, video and audio. And it's only me. No help in these parts, not yet anyway. So the folks that contribute to the show, who get the ad-free episodes, who get Patreon perks and things like that, they are the ones who keep this show on the rails and moving forward. And I would just like to thank the executive producers who contribute at $10 or more or higher. Those just stunningly beautiful people are Ken M., Bowie Barks, Dominic Kerr, Jerry Duran, Duran, and you know him, it's William. Thank you for the folks who subscribe, who listen, who smash a like button or two, who get the Patreon feed for free. That's a great way to hang on to what's going on over here and get some updates on the show. And of course, the folks who contribute financially, even if it's $1 a month, that is monumental compared to advertising revenue and trying to do sales integration. But no. Having a community here that gets value from the show and supports the work is the goal of many of the creators that I speak to on this program and speak to privately, and I'm thrilled to be part of that world. So thank you for visiting patreon.com/influence pod. And let us tarry no further. Let's get back to the death conversation. We're back with Jade Adgate and Caren Martineau of Bevival and the Farewell Library. I would say respectively, but I reversed those. So, do the math, figure that out. We'll talk about where you can follow them in a moment. But first, we have to answer this week's trivia question. Why was Frank Sinatra's funeral, not his funeral, the ambulance that brought him to the hospital on the day he died, why did it make record time in LA traffic? A, fear of an earthquake. Nobody chose that. B, gas prices were going nuts. Jade chose B. Or was it C? Everyone was home watching Seinfeld. That was Karen's choice. Now, I always give guests a chance to change their answer if you thought about it during the break. Do you want to reconsider?
I'm sticking with B.
Jade's sticking. Caren, you're going to stick?
Yes.
The correct answer is that everyone was glued to their television sets for the final episode of Seinfeld in 1988.
It feels right.
So much so that nobody was driving in LA.
Feels right to me. Mm-hmm.
Great.
I think
it's a
very
LA
interesting
thing.
trivia question would be around the CPR and hospitals. And I feel like I'd love to throw some trivia questions for future guests at you.
Yeah, please do. And also, maybe there are interesting statistics about causes of death and things like that are often surprising because we don't, we fear, terrorism and car accidents, but actually the things that kill us are much more mundane and insidious.
So here's one little one. Did you know that CPR, so in the movies when we watch it, it's almost always like 75% of the time it works. But in reality, it's less than 15% of the time.
Meaning when fictional characters do CPR, it's like, we saved him.
Like Grey's Anatomy.
We got him back. But mostly it's not.
It very rarely is effective. It's most effective in hospitals. So if you have, obviously, trained professionals with all the equipment, and even then, effective is a little arguable because, what's the rate of success? Is it 1 day, 5 days, 6 months? Yeah.
I love that. Keep them coming. I'll look out for more fun facts on your
Instagram. I don't know. I'll try to think of a fun one.
So my next question for you both, this is about community. It's about changing hearts and minds, education, cultural awareness, and cultural shifts. It does not sound like there's a lot of money to be made in your lines of work. And so I know neither of you are out to be millionaires, but how do you pay the rent? doing this sort of work? What does that look like for you these days in 2024?
I am very glad that you asked that, because I think one of the things that the death doula movement needs to be aware of and be really transparent about is that this is not an education that we should enter into in order to become a professional. That really, when we are being invited to companion other people, the first ask of that is to develop our own relationship with death. So if you feel the urge to support other people in their relationships with death, in order for that to be authentic, you have to be willing to put your money where your mouth is, right? You have to do it for yourself first. And we just don't live in a culture that gives us, permission to invest in things unless we can monetize them. But I think many, many, many of us are called into this work, and we assume it's because we're going to make a profession out of it. But I think in reality, it's because this is an essential part of our humanity. And I think we are craving some kind of nourishment in this relationship. So I do not make my primary income through my death work. Most of the money that I make is in the form of teaching. So I have apprentices and I teach them in person here in Nashville the tools of death midwifery. And that's what keeps my business solvent. But I think the big kind of reflection right now is that if we can build awareness of this work, that we will have more clients and then we can make a living out of it. But I'm very skeptical of that, because in my experience, every time I have a client, I have a huge undertaking emotionally and energetically. And I cannot do that for more than 1 or 2 people at a time. And I can't do that for more than, 6 people a year, right?
Right. So like there's an emotional cap on and a time cap on what you could even do. And then it's just making me think but then we just understand that we're going to be writing a check to the funeral home because that's just what we do. And so your work is not capitalistically valued, but the other industries are.
And the goal here, I think, is for us to teach these tools so that every person feels empowered to care for their loved ones at the end of life. Like ideally, we are all death midwives and there's not a profession around this, right? I mean, we're all going to die and everyone we love is going to die. So shouldn't we figure out how we should be prepared for death, right? Like it's, so I'm not necessarily looking to, I think that the goal here is not to make the money. It's to figure out how to nourish ourselves enough to be able to continue to companion people until we have created the communities that have the skills and capacity to do it, internally.
Yep.
I agree. I think this is what we're doing is next generation.
Yeah.
You have to, you go into this understanding that how one monetizes or makes a living off of this as an early adopter is not possible.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, the question when I ventured into this topic and, my friends would say, are you making money yet? And some of them still do. And I find it really annoying at this point because they know that's, while it may have been in the original business plan, while I was pitching the idea to raise funds to do this, eventually I abandoned it because the monetization of something which is so heart-centric, and it is, I almost feel like it's a moral obligation to help initiate, to be the kind of, fire starter for this. I hope, but I don't necessarily believe, but I hope in my lifetime that things will have moved, the needle will have moved to a point where I can say, great. So now, next generation, they could take advantage of this and it will not be foreign and as forbidden as we experience it.
Right.
So I pivoted after developing this business plan and launching a website and having a marketplace on it to get rid of all as a alternative to the appalling array of products that were out in the market at that point in time, overpriced, appalling, and just poorly designed, let's say.
Products such as what?
Urns,
Oh, okay.
urns and little keepsakes that one could put people's ashes, or things that are memorabilia,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Merchandise. Death merch.
Merchandise, right? The marketplace, uh, and things have gotten better, but so many entrepreneurs have stepped out with the better, more beautiful uh, solution to something, and they haven't been able to make it, right? Because the market isn't there yet. Where the market is right now is that we're taking, it's a variation on a theme. So if you're out there looking for a legacy plan, how to do your wills and trusts and all of that, it's a very easy transaction online.
Mm-hmm.
So what will cost you less than $1,000 online would cost you $3,000 to $5,000 in person in somebody's office, right?
Sure.
So those are the kinds of things that are working. The monetization is if you are teaching, you're going into corporations, you're working with HR, right? Or you're working with local community groups, or you're speaking. Those things are working. I give workshops, and the other thing that I discovered that works. Now, it's certainly not making a living, but it is a transaction which proves the audience will show up and they will pay to attend. Are the film series that I have, the film festival that I have, the workshops that I give. Yes, you can't make a living off of this, and yeah. So I'm not eating cat food. But if I had to, that's how I started. I said, if I need to do this and I end up eating cat food, I'm willing to make that sacrifice because this is so important to me to be part of this.
You mentioned like investors in the early stages, and that obviously they would never make their money back. But then that made me think of two things. One, like a grant from a nonprofit organization or a government organization, which then is like, hey, this doesn't need to make money. We just want it to exist so that we can, educate people and help people. And then that immediately made me think about Patreon or a fan is a weird term here, but like an audience funding model. And I talk about this a lot, where it's like there are some creators where I want to get the bonus content, or I want to get behind the scenes, or I want exclusive access to something. And there are some creators where I'm like, I just want this to exist. I don't. We interviewed a wonderful man who has created a Minecraft server for autistic children because autistic kids they want to play video games like any other kid, but they do not interact socially with kids on the internet the same way that neurotypical kids do. And so they created the safe space for kids and parents to play Minecraft together on a server with thousands of other autistic or spectrum kids. And I was like, you're amazing. I don't have autistic children. I will never use this product. Here's $5 a month because I just want you to keep the lights on here. And so I guess my point is like, I will come to Bevival to get comfort or resources when I need them, and then I will not come there again. But if you have a way for me to like donate NPR style, I don't even listen to the radio anymore because I don't want to hear the news, right? But I'm a contributor because I need that journalism to keep going. So I'm rambling, but what do you think about any of this?
Absolutely. Yes. And, it's taken X amount of years. My strength, one of my strengths and one of my weaknesses, raising money is not a strength. Asking for money is not a strength.
It sucks.
Right. So I've been weaned on the transaction. I love merchandising. If in a perfect universe, if I could create a space where people can buy beautiful things, right? Yeah, I'm all there.
You came out of that world, didn't you? Worked in entertainment and beauty and stuff like that, right?
Yes. And fashion and, and so, yes, I love that type of transaction more so though, when I'm standing in front of people and it's a live event and I can witness in real time the transformation that occurs by what's happening in that room. And people are truly grateful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, oh, that's so great. It's like truly grateful that they have entered a space that they were so afraid to go.
Right.
And now they have some pathway. They have steps, they have this guidebook to do what they need to do to become more secure about what's about to unfold in the timeline, whatever it's about to unfold. That is the win. That's the transaction. That, that's another type of transaction that feeds me in a way that money just never did.
It's an emotional transaction, or it's filling up your, again, I'm a secular person. I'm not a soul guy, but it fills your soul.
It's an investment in building a better community. And I think that's something that a lot of us are willing to energetically invest in. I know for me, I'm always hesitant to have any kind of commitment to creating content because I feel like I need to preserve my energy for the people that may need me. And one thing about this work is it's so unpredictable, right? Like, I don't know who's going to call, if it's going to be a 5-day thing, a 5-month thing. I never know what is around the corner in these spaces. So I tend to shy away from anything that requires content. I try to look at the content that I offer as education and a digital resume. I like that my clients or potential clients can go on Instagram and get a sense of who I am. I think when you are considering hiring a death doula, you're picturing someone in all black, maybe with a big hat and some crystals and a crow and some sage, and that is some death doulas. And it's,
but even if they're not that person, you're just like Googling death doula in my area and hoping that the person is going to be the most connected, kind, right person for you. Like, that's impossible.
I think anytime we can lower the barrier to entry. So here's who I am, right? Here's what I believe in. Here's some of my experiences. Here are the books that I, read. Here's the way I reflect on them. To me, that's the point of the online education, is to continue like developing communities that aren't going to immediately scroll when someone says death, right?
Yeah.
Or people who, this has been really interesting. There are certain reels that I make that I am stunned by what the general internet responds to. Sometimes I make a reel and I'm like, oh, people are going to love this. And then crickets. And other times I am not anticipating it, but it's something that is an essential truth that we haven't quite articulated, that leaves with a little uplifting one-liner at the end of it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't want to have any pressure around what I'm saying about death, or how I'm talking about death, or how often I'm sharing about death or grief, because it starts to sap some of the authenticity, I think, for me.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's a hard line to balance, though.
So to that end, we're running out of time, but my penultimate question maybe is like, you're focusing on this for your profession, like you're talking about this and reading about death, 30 to 40 hours a day, maybe more. How do you compartmentalize? How do you disconnect? Do you want to? Or conversely, do you feel like you have built up so many death literacy muscles that you're like, it's fine. It doesn't faze me anymore. Like, how do you think about that sort of stuff?
So compartmentalizing and disconnecting for me would be clues that I am living in an overwhelmed nervous system and might need to kind of ground and connect. So I think for me, the meaning of this work, maybe the meaning of my whole life, is to be able to build communities through connection and collaboration that can walk through difficult transitions. And as long as I'm aligned with that meaning and that purpose, it's like the energy behind the work is limitless. So when I start finding myself getting really wiped out, burned out, drained, it means that the work I'm doing is not connected to that thing that is so meaningful and restorative for me.
Interesting.
So yes, I do think we can build some muscles. I think learning how to feel safe when you're brushing shoulders with people who are dying and grieving, or just in a really intense emotional experience. I mean, that is a lot of work, right? There's no way around it. That takes cultivation of a very unique skill set. But also, I think when I'm grounded and really caring for myself, that energy source is kind of limitless, as long as I'm doing what is actually meaningful. So does that answer the question?
It does, and it's making me think a lot about a lot of things. So thank you.
Yeah.
What about you, Caren?
Really well said, Jade. Thank you. So for me, it really is a creative process. And what I mean by creative processes is that on a daily basis, I wake up and do I think, oh, I'm going to talk about death? No, not at all. No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for avenues from which to have a conversation that has the concept embedded in it, but it doesn't, but it sidesteps the ugliness that people expect, right? And so it's what can I bring to that conversation? The manifestation, the expression. What is the expression going to be? That the basis of branding is you identify what is missing, but what could be desired, and how to get people to aspire to that desire.
Yeah.
Right. So I am creating the container. I hope to be creating the container from which the aspiration, you start with the aspiration and you build the desire. And from the desire, people will take action.
Yep. I'm not a marketer, but I work adjacent to that world. And that does make sense. And it's so interesting to apply it to this because it's not a product, but it is getting people activated around something that's very important. And it is a marketing problem, even though it's not a capitalist endeavor. I have 45,000 more questions, but I have to let you go on with your lives and work.
Are you less traumatized? Can you say the D word now?
Talk to me in a week. No, truly though, I knew this would happen. Of like, hey, I'm nervous about this conversation, and now it feels better thanks to your work and insights. So people who are listening to this, they're affected by this, they're interested, they're figuring out some of this stuff in their families and their lives. Where do they go to connect with you both? What would be an entry point for either of you if they want to follow your work or get in touch?
So go to bevival.com. That's the combination of being and revival, which is the term Bevival, right? So bevival.com is the site. On Instagram, it is bevival.inspires, right? So that's me, us, and for Jade.
Yeah, so you can find out more about my death midwifery services. Some of them are offered virtually. Things like death anxiety, the existential questions. I just want to say that fear, that hesitation around having this conversation, it's a really beautiful entry point, because I find that the biggest hurdles I face when I'm working with clients is if they start off with a feeling of detachment. If they say, I'm not afraid to die, or it's like if they can detach from it that way, it's really hard to start digging into the why and the what and the how we start to build that relationship. So I think that the fact that you feel that, it's a common thing that we work with. So you can find out about those services, about how to support your own family or how to become a death midwife at farewellfellowship.com. Online, on Instagram, there's the Farewell Library with lots of book reviews, a link to the podcast that we work on. And there we interview people who are writing and speaking about death and grief and how we can enter more fully and presently into these spaces.
And Jade does a fabulous job in these interviews, and it's really a delight to work with her, and what she brings, the insight that she brings, and it's serious and very lighthearted in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Firstly, all of the links that you just said will be in the description of in the show notes for audio listeners and in the YouTube description for video watchers. And then I almost overlooked it. The podcast. Tell people what it is and where they can find it.
So so the podcast hosted by Jade on Bevival is available also on Spotify. I'm still working on getting all of the episodes up, but this year's episodes are up, and there's almost 30 interviews in the library with 24 is with Jade, and prior to that, my other colleague, Devorah Medwood. And we've got some significant people, again, authors who are, they're leaders in their field, mm-hmm. and talking about the topic and their publication, their works. And so you can go to Bevival, click on the podcast tab in the nav bar, and read the exit interviews, the written exit interviews, which also have an audio link, mm-hmm. on those pages. And
Perfect. I want to thank you both for spending this hour and change on the show, and I learned a lot. And I hope I'm confident listeners will have their perspective shifted a little bit.
Yeah,
at
thank
least.
You for building these spaces where we can talk about this stuff.
I told you I was nervous. I was looking forward to this conversation, but also anxious about it, not really wanting to do it in the moment. And as expected, as predicted, thoroughly loved every second of it, and have a lot of things to mentally chew on, and perspectives on death and grief have shifted dramatically. I actually was not quite I wasn't entirely sure where the conversation would go around the death industry, but in addition to all the personal stuff, the sort of capitalistic ramifications around how everything in our world has become about products and services rather than communal life, families and groups getting together to support each other, even when that means someone in my home is dying or dead, and we, the human beings who love that person or who know that person, are the ones who are going to face that and address that. Duh. And yet, you never think about that, because everything we do, we call someone else to do it for us so that we don't have to, cut the heads off the food that we're eating or bury the bodies of the people that we lose. There's a lot to unpack in this. And as usual, the internet stokes the flames of capitalism, and also often, as we've learned here, can provide some remedy and relief from the marketization of our lives and our humanness by connecting people together and offering them support, wisdom, presence, and just to put the bow on it, literacy about a topic that is so complicated and difficult. If you found this useful, I really do suggest you head on over to Bevival and follow Jade, because I think I'm going to do my best to incorporate some of this work and content into my let's call it weekly consumption. I can't commit to thinking about death every day, but maybe a reminder, maybe some wisdom on a weekly basis will exercise the muscles, flex those muscles, so that when it's time to confront any of this, maybe we'll have a little bit more strength, a little bit more resolve to either support someone or to be supported. So, hit all the buttons, like and subscribe. Do check out the YouTube channel if you're listening on the audio version and you're interested in seeing the wonderful people that we chat with on the show. You can head on over to youtube.com/Influence Podcast. And it's the same show, but it's the video version of the interviews. And it is a really good discovery mechanism for new folks, new listeners to find the show. So if you like and subscribe, smash whatever those buttons might appeal to you, it really does help. Leave a review on your podcast platform of choice, Apple or Spotify. Both support reviews, I believe. There are other apps that do. But again, I don't know that there's much algorithmic magic that happens there, but when people discover the show and there's a fresh review about a fresh topic or a guest that you particularly enjoyed, it reminds people that there are lots of really engaged listeners who are here with us. And of course, do write the show and leave voicemails. Thank you to Carrie again for just a deeply personal message for our guests. And it made for some outstanding conversation. So you can be part of this program. I encourage you to be in text or written, text or audio form, telephone form, if you will. 347-871-6548. Huh? I think I got it. If I'm wrong, the correct phone number is in the description and probably on your screen right now. And email, Discord, Patreon, they're all in the show notes or on your screen. And for now, I am headed out, but I wish you love and support to anyone in your life, now or in the future, who is struggling with anything. Because it's all hard. And I would remind you that a lot of things suck, but also, there's a lot of cool video games coming out. So there's things to look forward to. Thank you so much for listening and watching, subscribing, and I'll talk at you in 1 week's time.